Shinji and Warhammer40k. Chapter 39. The Coming Storm. Part 1. While the world did have practical fusion power, the plans were very expensive to construct. That Tokyo 3 had 3 of them, all under the geofront, was thus very impressive. These also ate up a noticeable chunk of the international budget. It was bad enough trying to get approval for one, but 3 power plants? The leverage for that must have been insane. Gendo Ikari had it done. Tokyo 3 quite literally overpowered Kyoto 2. Ridiculously cheap electricity acted like a magnet for the industry, and also quite literally dragged regional economy along with it. Shinji Ikari, drawing upon the immense power reserves of the city and the might of the Ava, then gave unto them artificial fossil fuels. The economic consequences of that! Fortunately, one couldn't patent the process. The world had already learned not to ignore the name Ikari by that time, but the necessary new techniques and technologies required and made up on the spot just for the construction of Castle Sternbrand? It was insane. Just out of 7 days, once again the fortress city sent waves of unrest all through the global markets and forever changed the way they'd have to do business. Artificial fossil fuels, carbon nanotubes, room temperature superconductors, super high efficiency crystal capacitors, cybernetic myomer, mind-machine interfaces, mass-produced solid-state lasers, weaponized antimatter, the rudimentary equations for faster-than-light communication, or even matter transmission. And Azazel taught man to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all colouring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, Amoros the resolving of enchantments, Barakajil taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arakil the signs of the earth, Shamsil the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the earth. Shortly thereafter, man was drowned for having achieved civilization. Shinji Ikari was raised Shinto in a nation which had to take best use out of limited arable land, so had an ingrained distrust of how much sin and debauchery there was in actually having growing cities filled with people seeking to master the earth. As like the Mayans in Palenque, the Persians in their stewardship of Babylon, and the Khmer with Angkor Wat, he felt that any society that overextended itself beyond what its environment or citizens could support would just inevitably self-destruct. Swallowed by the jungle or the desert, and gone from the memory of man until their bones were dug up as museum pieces. Nothing made by man would last forever, and their vices and iniquities ultimately their own defeat. Surely a god would know that. They'd done even worse since then. Why were those greater atrocities allowed to happen? Second impact was caused by man's own hubris. The relationship between Ningen and Kami was more give and take, a balance in things. There were still shades of crude animism there, but he supposed it was just the difference between worldviews. He couldn't doubt the strength of their faiths, enough to last for thousands of years, even while great empires flourished and died. It was a different time, he supposed. It was easy to judge thousands of years down the line, as if these things functioned by the scientific process, trial and error, and the most obvious solutions wouldn't simply be discarded by the emotional logic of the Mailu. Trying to force people to accept the most logical path, that was too much like Nagisa's way of doing things. Still, it was disturbing. His city was strong, his people were happy. Almost nothing was beyond their power, and damn anything that tried to strike them down for arbitrary reasons. He would keep them that way. The city was a boom town. When he first arrived, it was starting to empty. Most of the building was done, and with the construction companies leaving, so followed the workers and the economy that relied upon their business. Now the population had doubled in little under a year. The risk of destruction didn't seem to diminish the attraction. The bubble grew bigger and bigger, everyone involved trying to get their share before it all went to hell. Perhaps even literally. Until that happened, they were ridiculously rich, all because of the Ikaris. Holco Construction had gone from a middling land ventures corporation into one of the elites, allowed into Inhis. That conglomerate, proud creators of Magnos Tancred, was a powerhouse. They had unlimited lines of credit with both the People's Republic of China and the new Council Republics for raw resources, including fissionables. Not the Japanese government, them. Nuclear materials, in their hands. Their link with the local JSSDF garrison was becoming suspicious. Cerberus Base was very nearly an appendage, a testing pool for new weapons intended for in his service. And to think, they could all have been ruined husks instead. The boy counselled them not to get too used to such windfalls. The collapse was inevitable. There was no further room to expand. On Earth, Ada corrected firmly. Hikari had to grudgingly concede the point. But only if we live through this. We're manoeuvring here with our lives as a capital, and not just to score market points. Our price is Mars. Enough of this penny ante crap. Even the board agrees. You've been leading us into the economic bursting point necessary for outer space exploitation. We have to keep moving or we self-destruct. If we die, we die. If we live, we want Mars. Fine. I'll even get its core to spin again, so you get a magnetic field to protect against solar wind. Happy? Kensuke frowned and rubbed at his chin. You know what? I'm not even sure when you're exaggerating for effect anymore. There was of course pain. The cold intensified such sensations, and exhaustion pulled at every step. Within the geofront, Ayanami's memories proved more useful, but as she was now out in the open, she tried to come forward. She paused at the door. She knew nerve was still intact. The last angel was defeated most soundly, and her very presence was an unnecessary abomination. She couldn't simply return to sleep, however, for that part of him burned with a curiosity that Ayanami had never experienced. Every human being has to contend with the question, why am I here? Is that not so? I have not needed to do so. Am I not human? No, that just means you were indoctrinated at a very young age. I'm pretty certain you're wrestling with that question now. Metaphorically, I mean. Our existence is pretty much that. Isn't it? Shinji Ikari had raised himself in a Socratic method. She missed the antics of his voices in her head. Finally, she could understand just how shapeless and boring were her own thoughts before his arrival. We're hesitating. Are we afraid? She took a deep breath. The Emperor is my guide. I shall not falter. She began to turn the wheel on the entrance hatch. Though I leap through the cold, dark void, I shall not fear. It was dark out, but with many flood lamps, workers tried to get the city back into order before dawn. It was wet, but only to a little more than shin deep. The waters were moving and would drain away soon. Very little comfort at the moment. Shinji Ikari tried to look before moving, but Ayanami Rei had never felt any hesitation with her steps. She shivered. She had, after all, spent the last few months in a nice, long, warm bath. She'd gone in fully expecting to all give that up for a horribly mismatched fight against an angel Ava, mindless bliss for possibly painful, gruesome death. She'd expected to come up swinging, literally fighting off hell on earth with everything in her power, with fist and nail and teeth and a smile on her face. So she gets to stand out in a cold, dark alley with her socks sogging wet and with someone else still living the best parts of her life. She sighed and rubbed at her forehead. Of course, she only hoped her combination of their talents didn't bring with it a double dose of their shitty luck. A large bulldozer rumbled past. There was no fear in the eyes of the soldiers, and soggy civilians in large trucks only showed subdued irritation. No despair. They hadn't lost. Not yet. It was not her time. The piece that was Ayanami was beginning to understand frustration. Ikari would have liked to understand the situation further. Like it or not, it'd be a waste of a perfectly valid opportunity to just go back to sleep. Carpe diem and all that there. Ayanami does not pout. Her footsteps sloshed noisily, but she didn't care. Flash. Prudence if magnified is cowardice. Caution is a blood kin to indecision. Courage taken to the extreme is nothing less than suicidal impatience. Folly and wisdom, too often, wear the same garment. By the dark gods, as usual you do go on and on and on and on. Just get to the point already. I am amazed that not only have my young king's essential character remained unchanged, but he had turned his central flaw into strength. Why is it that his first instinct is to fortify? You will not dare call him a coward, Xeno witch. It does take courage to accept the facts of one's own limitations. Corn cares not from where blood flows, but if I see another squad of cornate berserkers charge a prepared kill zone, I will
At the very least, this is why we have jump hacks, you morons. I will have chaos undivided by beating the habit of combined arms into your skulls.
Enough.
Be at ease, but this only drives us to ponder. Is he an Imperial Fist or an Iron Warrior?
Oi, can he be none of the above?
It is a metaphor, you ignorant dog!
Ha! That's what calls iron, innit? But that's titanium.
And now you must burn. All of you! You will now burn!
Striking Scorpion would be apt as well.
Burdenated hellfire!
She leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. The city had changed, and Ladle's attack left whole blocks missing. A passing helicopter lit up a poster nearby. Evangelion Fantasy Battles 2, The Call of Chaos. Coming soon, November 2016. It looked fairly new, so no more than a few months had passed. Chaos? She shook her head. It wasn't important. It took a little more time, but she didn't manage to situate herself. There should be a Cardinal safe house nearby. She slid into the alley behind a disused garage. One of the junction boxes was clearly labelled Warning High Voltage with 2 crossed lightning bolts, an innocuous symbol, were it not that the same sigil appeared on the Thunderhammer and Storm Shields and the heraldry of the Heraclitus. A little back thinking would be that all these things did indeed possess lethal electrical charges. She spoke to the junction box. I am the eggplant. Cuckoo-ca-choo. Nothing happened. For a moment she wondered if it would be suitably ironic if there was nothing there to back up the sheer arrogance of thinking people would keep on obeying his smallest whims for all the past months. She understood quid pro quo, or that even kings have to pay for their upkeep. She sighed. They changed the codes. Ah, hell. She punched at the switchbox. Cast iron crumpled under her dainty fist. Fortunately, citywide power was out, for safety's sake during flooding. The wall beside it receded, water dribbling down a downwards passage. She decided to worry about the fish-shaped dent in the morning. This is a safe house. For a few moments she boggled at the sight. As expected, it was off the grid, with its own independent power supply and the walls suitably reinforced. It was just bigger than she expected, and the fixed supporting beams of the personal bunker held fast the structural armour. A large tarp-covered shape dominated the space. She pulled on it and gasped. It was a tank. A chimera, to be precise, with a dual bolter turret. They managed to mass-produce it already? She mused on how they managed to sneak it in. She looked around and wondered how they even expected to get it out. There was no ramp leading up to the street. Who are they? Again she shook her head to realign her priorities. Cloves first. Pain she could endure, but a carry wouldn't have it any more than necessary. A consul nearby called to her, but no, there must be method. Patience was their way. She changed into bland work overalls and trudged over to the bunk beds. So tired. I should be gratified that things have gone as planned, but I am here. There is something wrong with the scenario. What have I done? She meant both Akari and Ayanami. What sort of scenario required such equipment just for a relief bunker? What wars were there that demanded such doomsday caches? I should contact my selves in the morning. For the moment, this body needs rest. I think for a newborn, I have done quite well. Most people tend to forget their dreams. Even Rei Ayanami could dream. She was normal enough in that respect. The problem was that, while for normal people sleep was an effective way of shortening the passing of time, her dreams offered no escape from the pain of her existence. Even her best memory, prior to meeting Shinji Ikari, was adorned by the sensations of something trying to melt her brains from the inside, then being knocked around as the entry plug explosively ejected from the spine, careening off the walls before crashing to rest. There were memories of being torn apart, of being boiled alive, of loneliness and pain ever since childhood. Being strangled to death by Naoko Akagi was surprisingly the least painful way to go. It wasn't until Shinji Ikari's return from his walkabout that Ritsuko Akagi ceased dummy plug research. An artificial piloting system unable to utilize the AT field was worse than useless. It was giving a free Ava to the enemy. Rei Ayanami's dreams were not pretty places to be trapped within. And now, student, I will teach you shibari. Those had better be in dreams and not new memories, was the slightly shell-shocked clone's first thought at her return to wakefulness. She'd yet to open her eyes. Dimly, she was aware of movement. The part of her that was Ayanami reflexively snapped out to grab at something close to her face. The part that was Akari realized it was a hand. Danger! Ah! A shrill voice sounded very close by over to her left side. She sat up and yelled as well, trying to roar frighteningly, but unfortunately, through Ayanami Rei's voice box. Ah! She opened her eyes to see a little boy trying to pull away. His companions seemed petrified. Ah! They both ended up screaming. They paused and stared confusedly at each other. Ah! They shouted again. She let him go. He fell on his rear, more pouty than frightened. At some point, Shinji Ikari must have integrated the boys more into his plans, she realized. This is not a good thing. The rest were grinning. Soon enough, they were introduced. The 4 children were Hiroshi, Mito, Aso, and Izumi. They recognized her as Ayanami Rei, and first she pressed on her own questions rather than give them any opportunity to ask theirs. It was supposed to be a Class 4 safe house, so how is it they could get in, much less know of its location? Even a systematic measuring of building dimensions all over Tokyo 3 wouldn't have revealed its presence. The entrance is set into the wall behind a storage room, and the gap for the way down is disguised behind an apparently immovable stack of rusted crates and assorted car parts. Only ground-penetrating radar would have revealed its presence, and it wouldn't seem amiss, just one more storage basement. There were 2 more entrances, one within the building, inside a stockroom and behind an innocuous pile of heavy car parts, and another led into the tunnels under the city streets. The alley entrance was secured by a voice-activated lock. The garage entrance was not. Its primary protection was secrecy, a small hatch under a car's back seat. Class 4 safe houses were intended for the pilots or their rescuers, carrying unconscious or uninjured with them. The Gretchen, though curious and rampant trial and error, knew all the safe houses. I am impressed and appalled. All an enemy had to do was interrogate one of them to compromise the pilot's exit plans. They are children. They will break. It was the aftermath of an angel attack. These children were wondering why I'm not with the others. There are other things I have to study, she replied in Ayanami's tone. There are currently 2 of me at this point in time. It is essential that no one know I'm here. She advised them not to think too deeply about it. Time travel was rather torturous like that. No one must know, or things would change from what I remember. She cannot, must not, give them any details. They were children. They accepted it. In a world where gods walk and psychics peer into the future, it didn't seem so unusual. If they argued or asked too many annoying questions, she could simply leave and deprive them of their adventure. She'd proved her identity by lifting the tank single-handed. She might not be the biggest, but she was the strongest. Ergo, she was the boss, at least on the field. There were, of course, no maps for the Tokyo 3 tunnels. They only had their memory to guide them. It was with some pity, though her face didn't show it, that she knew why these children were so free to roam around even in the direct aftermath of an angel attack. Their parents were recent immigrants to Tokyo 3. They weren't dead, but merely negligent. Even with the high pay, what sort of person would willingly bring children into a war zone? Either someone who had no choice, or someone too greedy and lacking no one to foist off the children onto while they went to work. She asked for them to deliver a message to Kensuke Ada. Only he may obtain an archive of recent events, without inquiring into the request in turn. It seems that he may have bigger mysteries to unravel. She yawned. It was starting to dawn on her how ironic it was that she could tear apart heavy steel bunkerheads with her bare hands if she really wanted, but her body was still so very disgustingly weak in other matters. She opened her eyes. That was a dream too. Dreaming that you were awake was a weird experience, but not so unusual. She blamed Ayanami's near-perfect recall and Akari's plotting patterns for the realistic quality. She looked around. The safe house was essentially a metal box sank into the ground. If there were actually injured people, the best place to send them would be a hospital. Fat lot of good a heavily armoured APC would do, except in punching through obstacles to get them there. The safe house carried only basic medical supplies. The notion that children would find their way into the safe house was likewise ludicrous. The alley entrance was voice-activated, and the hatch had 2 layers of armour plate behind it. True, she'd managed to bypass the lock by punching it, but then again, one had to know where it was in the first place. The construction crew was a possible leak, but there was no reason children should know of it. The inside entrance should have been prevented, the Gretchen, a bunch of elementary children, by the simple expedient of the doors being held shut by the biggest padlocks that could be found. All other windows were high up, and the tunnel entrance should look indistinguishable from other walls filled with tubes and wiring. Then she found a bunch of data storage bricks nearby. They were slightly larger than the cassette-shaped slates used in SStat players, but more rugged and reliable. Second Impact forced manufacturers away from disposable media. It was a shock at just how fragile and easily lost the sum total of human knowledge was. Paper was more robust, but also vulnerable to water and flame. So her dream about that being a dream was a dream. She clutched at her head. This is going to drive me insane. Her entire existence was an improbability, but still. He had never really found any use for extensionless and cones and never should. The thought was gone from her mind. There was a computer nearby. She focused on the stack of documents rather than think about the implications. That someone had deliberately told the Gretchen of the location of the safe house and had known she'd be there. That someone had willingly exposed those children to danger. Not even she knew how stable her angelic powers would remain, not to mention her own mental state. The woman was so tiny in its palm. The Evangelion kneed the jet alone and let it fall back. It put its left hand close to its chest, protectively. It opened its mouth as if to roar, but instead Shinji's voice came out of its radio and external speakers. If this Evangelion had a voice, it would say, I have walked as a god, fought as a god. I have made the battlefield my home. I am the god in the machine. I am the hope and fury of man. I am Evangelion, Titanicus, Principio Eternus. The enemies of humanity will die by my hand. They shall be broken. You all, did you really believe this could have stood up against the angels? While we were all fighting for our lives, you were wasting your time and money in this thing, this soulless thing, this toy of greed and ambition. This thing was never about saving humanity. It was just about money and position. You would have let Masato-san die. You would have a city burn. This displeases me. The Evangelion walked over to its fallen bolter and wielded it again. It aimed at the jet alone and fired, shredding it further. The Evangelion roared once more. Know it well, you who would dare standing in its way. I am Principio Eternus! Holy crap, she muttered. How can anyone say all this melodrama with a straight face? Never had she fully realised how so utterly insane were the words that come out of Shinji Ikari's mouth. The words as he said them were heartfelt and spontaneous, and as thus he couldn't think them unnatural. Ayadami didn't understand the concept of speeches to begin with. She couldn't be inspired by words no matter how grand, but the way his truth rang within her soul. She wasn't embarrassed. She was horrified. This is... me? No matter what, Shinji Ikari had also thought himself as still that child lost in the intensity of a galaxy, utterly removed from his experience. The face that he actually presented to the world was something else entirely. He is a madman. His enemies are never really sure that he would not unleash the wrath of the Evangelion upon the troubled world. Ikari would never, but they do not know that. The insane are unpredictable like that. Fortunately, his allies did, and explained why it was such fun to torment the boy with unwarranted praise. It was akin to calling a fat man tiny, except by treating Shinji Ikari as some sort of warlord was to set up false expectations. People walked on eggshells around him, as he could tear them all apart if ever really angered. Well, he could. She could, at least. The irony was making her head hurt. If the power of mankind wasn't enough, then he'd become a monster. He'd already planned it. Was he already a monster to have actually considered that? She turned her attention back to the screen. The primary argument against the Ava was that they were unstable. The destruction of the Trident prototype was a crushing rebuttal otherwise. The yield may have been only a few kilotons, but no one else had anything that could contain a nuclear explosion to such an extent that a woman but a throw's toss away wouldn't even experience any increased irradiation. Nuking the Ava wouldn't work. It could just direct the energy right back at them in a focused beam of hot plasma. She wondered if the generals felt the same way the captain of the Yamato felt in seeing torpedo planes swooping down en masse, helpless, obsolete at the height of their power. It was a fate cruel in its inevitability. Shinji Kari was boastful. Incredibly, because of his apparent insanity, they had no choice but to take him at his word. He was, after all, Gendo Ikari's son. Would he really say that without anything to back it up? Did he not have the support of Nerve, and of his father, its master? So audacious that there was refuge in that. So unreal that it couldn't be a trick. The worst they could do would be to call it as a bluff, and be proven to be as the useless white elephants they feared they would become. Join him, or kill him. There is no other road. The middle path was to do nothing, and as such become nothing. Roadkill was another way of putting it. The battles were intensifying, and they couldn't hide behind their own political processes. There was far less risk in trying to ingratiate themselves with the boy, and thus Nerve. After all, they wanted their own Evangelions eventually. Assassinating him would destroy an asset that would produce or train the next generation of pilots. And the whole thing about killing angels and preventing it third impact, of course. None of those reasons reduced her dismay. She'd gone back into the tanks well before the battle with Sandalphon. She could accept the method they used to kill it. The battle against Material was not so crazy. It was basically just stab and cut, though Magnos Tancred's first real appearance was a pleasant surprise. And then there was the battle against the Hakril. She felt like going, what the How does he do that? The homing laser could be used to hit any military site. Hell, all of them, all over the world, all at the same time. The world needed Evangelions now, if only to defend against other Evangelions. No wonder Seal relocated to the moon. Wait, what? The moon? A useful new memory at last. Also, troubling. She had no ideas. Perhaps something later would hint at what he planned to do about that. As before, Nerve's command center reported that there was no one inside the entry plug. Theoretically, it shouldn't even be able to activate. And if it was Berserker, when apparently all logical rules fled, then it should be acting far more aggressive. Instead, it acted like a wounded animal. It was afraid. But like hell that meant Asuka was going to hold back any. She kicked out of a disguised elevator block and gave chase. If she was asked, then her answer would be simple too. The Evangelion was a tool. It was no weapon, but power manifest. She felt the shockwaves pass as her Unit 2 ploughed through the streets, so fast that the air in front was like a brick wall. Nothing so simple as air resistance could stand up to the might she felt crawling across her veins. Nothing so mundane as momentum could dare prevent the fury she had to express. She pivoted on one heel and leapt sideways to surprise the enemy. The white Ava turned and seemed to cringe. Halt! Asuka shouted. Wham! Ava Unit 4 reeled from a G-impact stake to the face. Hammerzite! And then Asuka smashed it again. The white Ava's head had a noticeable dent inwards. It stumbled back unsteadily, clutching at its head and bellowing in pain. Asuka grinned. The big red warhammer in her hands was one of the last relics of Nerve German branch. Technically, the Ernster Einschlag, it multiplied the momentum in every swing to drive either a blunted or pointed spike embedded into the hammerhead. The handle was the same way, but fed by oversized shotgun shells. In many ways, really, Asuka would have found it laughable if only she had more to remember her old home. It was like they expected her to go hunting vampires or something. Wham! The white Evangelion let out a frantic scream, but that got cut off as Asuka hit it again. Asuka. She had to smile. The affection for both Ikari and Ayanami echoed through. She has indeed grown into a person worthy of the adulation of millions. Her face glows with the knowledge that she is not alone, that she is loved, that she has value. The loss of Germany was the fire that hammered her into shape, and its reclamation the quenching that tempers her resolve into the truly unbreakable. I can take some relief that the angels are at least beyond his capacity to plan, but now it's apparent that her options have been carefully cultivated. She had no fear about Soryu possessing the S2 engine. Odd, but even at her most savage she was comforting, and though she might not like the smile, every faithful guard dog did have a bit of the wolf left in him. She was symptomatic of the society that produced her. She wouldn't just destroy it for her own gains. After all, they were her vindication. The problem was Nagisa. She didn't really know Nagisa. His fascination with her was obvious, and perhaps for the same reasons as Ikari. Her fists tightened. Was this jealousy she was feeling? Perhaps. Do I want to punch his smarmy face in? Definitely. Stomp, 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 stomp. Magnell's Tancred bull rushed forward uncaring. The darts plinked off its armour, and those that punctured through seeped poison. Pity that the Dreadnought didn't have blood or LCL. Its own counter barrage was vastly more effective, forcing Metariel to close its big eye again. While the Angel was capable of rapid healing, a portion of its lower face was nothing but useless shredded meat, bulging with cancerous growth. With its many eyes, it was nonetheless blind to one side. The Angel swung up with one leg, the tip sharp and gleaming, and struck down at the much smaller enemy. The Dreadnought avoided it just barely. Flash! A positron beam holed through that leg, sending jets of E-Course spurting out. The Angel screeched and skittered back, tearing billboards off rooftops. The Dreadnought couldn't tilt its body high enough to aim its hard-mounted positron cannon at the Angel. With Metario still using its AT field to dampen all signals around Tokyo, its defensive ability was severely reduced. It was for an all-out attack, an ambushing being. Against the Ava AT field specialization and perfect armoring proved to be both useless. Unfortunately, being matched against a purely human-made machine was the worst possible thing for it. All the anti-Ava methods it had prepared, such as acid, poison, and the anti-AT field. It screeched frustration. Worthless. Worthless. Mana Kirishima growled as she ordered a temporary retreat. They needed to reload. Nerve had sent out crates of Megabolter rounds, but even that wouldn't be enough. They couldn't kill the enemy. No matter, they knew all along all they had to do was keep it occupied. Who is this Mana Kirishima? She shows the signs of far more blatant manipulations. Not just for Makari, but the generals that sent her. They had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. Ayanami had the absolute faith that comes from knowing her moment of ultimate sacrifice, but it was a greater faith to trust without assurances for the future. She looked at Kirishima and wondered at the girl who may have been, that girl with both body and spirit whole and happy. She is blessed in a world of flame in war, but it is better still to have a world without war. Nonetheless, a part of her was jumping up and down in glee. Is that a dreadnought? Trident Land Dreadnought! Hail Magnell's Tancred! Hail Master of Battle! This is wondrous! The Ava's a god machine, but only Magnell's Tancred is truly mankind's creation, and the worthy vessel of its indignation. She paused. No, this is bad. If we delve too deeply, what else may follow us back? The Ashino Lands cannon also drew an appreciative ooh. It wouldn't be enough against the Moon Cradle, which he'd already guessed was at the far side anyway, but it was good to finally have anti-orbital defense. Sadly, the big honking gun was a juicy, vulnerable target too. The most dangerous place on this planet, Tokyo 3, is ironically the safest. Since we would be under attack anyway, might as well be at the most fortified location on this earth, where we may offer our own meager efforts to the task, Monsignor Mendoza added. Sois moron! Why ask for help from the rest when you can have the very best? The French representative asked archly. Somewhat, replied the Javali monk. Consider it enlightened self-interest if you must. On the basis of a sophist adventure, you're asking the UN to suspend the rights of potentially hundreds of thousands of people. You're asking militaries to cooperate in seizing and deporting their own citizens. It's insane! The representative slammed his fist down in emphasis. This new organization you want us to create and support, the UN Zaigankana, would hardly even have to report to the UN. How could we know you're not just grabbing power for your own sake? In fact, I doubt you even have any of the supposed abilities that separate you from the rest of humanity. Other shouts joined in. Yes, this is just some form of new fantastic racism. People should be allowed to live in peace if that's what they want. Do you really have any proof that we can't handle it? The two psychics shared a look. They sighed. Lama Peaceman tugged at his beard and looked up. Are we in danger? We are. But I sense the question you really want to ask is, are we dangerous? The Brazilian prelate, orphanage manager, and sometime software engineer, palmed his own face and groaned. There was a reason they preferred not to make a public demonstration. They stood facing the assembly, within the UN Hall in Geneva. It was a closed summit, but cameras were rolling. The problem was that skepticism was endemic to humanity. The Lama took his hand away from his beard and gestured up. Podiums rose into the air. He closed his hand, and there was the sudden sound of wrenching metal. Twisted lumps of aluminium, wood and plastic dropped with dull thumps. "The answer is yes," he said flatly. "Imagine this, multiple 10, 100-fold. We will not be used as weapons against humanity. Though we lived through persecution, through golden cages and the bleak denial of our own selves, in the end we fear more what the enemy can do to us, can do using us, than whatever you may imagine for yourselves."
I could not have predicted that psychics exist. The initial scenario was intended against the predations of Seal. I have no idea what it would take to obtain the allegiance of these people. Ikari has made them weapons. And Nagisa... She clutched at her head. Pain. Pain, pain, pain. Her soul felt as if made out of jagged glass. "This is insanity," she whispered. There were too many variables. What is Ikari planning? I admire the Emperor, but to become him has never been my goal. It is the utmost arrogance to try and live up to that ideal. I am not an immortal guardian. I am not wise through the ages. Everything I see points towards that goal. Have I become consumed in my hubris? Have I forgotten the vow that no one else should suffer? He's supposed to be the servant of mankind, not its master. She stared at her hands. Is this why I have woken before my time? That the great enemy I must fight against is... him? No, it can't be. Ikari wouldn't do that. This is a city steeped in a cult of personality, but such things never last beyond the lifespan of their leaders. Unless he intended to become immortal, it would only backfire horribly. Unless... he intends to make some stupidly symbolic sacrifice? He doesn't even have to die, he can try to fake it. That's his route to retirement? Oh, the fool. The naive young fool. Ugh. Too many have already suffered. Too many have died to further his cause. Dare he try to escape judgment? She rewound the video back to the battle against the Hakril, and the moment the world really had to consider the consequences of Evangelion mastery. Nothing helped evangelism like a little demonstration for mass destruction. Principio Eternus roared and opened its hands. The beams split, one to each finger. The homing laser streaked to follow the pods released earlier. A few of the closer ones were annihilated, but there were those already almost at the cities, and there were more than 10.
No!
Shinji screamed. Control. I need more control! More! Evangelion. We must have more! The roar was such that the air itself shook from a pressure wave. The Evangelion writhed in place, and its back armour around the entry plug exploded. Light issued forth. Is that... Misato gasped in horror. No, it can't be. Like she remembered. Wings! As the ribbon of light unfolded, to her relief, but continued disbelief, it wasn't like the terrible visage of Adam. Arms, Maya whispered. He gave himself 2 more arms. The glowing limbs coalesced and spread its own fingers. In the distance, the beams split again. The capacitors are exploding, Shigeru shouted. They can't handle the strain. Oh shit! Everyone evacuate that area! Booms echoed through the corridors. Misato shouted up to the screen. Ray! Stop feeding the laser! My will is strong, she said softly. I will not bend. My hate is pure, Asuka added. I will not break! She fell to her knees, her fingers digging into the concrete. Around her, barrels crumpled inwards, gasoline spilling out in spurts. Lights flickered and the engine of the Chimera rumbled into activity. The tank rocked on its treads. Soda cans boiled over and exploded. She heard the scream and turned to see the 4 children from yesterday. She had to force it all back and lock it away. It was unnecessary there. Rei Ayanami should be able to detect such an outpouring of energy. Then, with growing horror, she realised, this is not an AT field. It was invisible to the detectors and those with attuned senses for the same reason that those standing in Times Square couldn't see Manhattan, or that an ant couldn't perceive the tire it is on will soon roll to crush it flat, or someone who lives on 3 dimensions but had dim knowledge about a 4th, trying to deal with existence in the 5th. One could pour buckets of brine into the Pacific and it wouldn't care. An AT field was a region of absolute territory, of certainty. That was why the quantum/physics effects of macroscale uncertainty was the neutralizing opposite. She knew then why the seeds were never meant to land on the same world, indeed the same solar system. It wasn't just a matter of separate and competing evolutionary ladders. Eventually the boiling pressure inside her subsided. She heard clapping.
That was cool! Do it again!
I'm a goddamn angel! She wanted to shout. Don't get too close. She'd expected to go out full bore, fighting impossible odds until she died. It was as he had intended. She couldn't really fault his reasoning. At that point it wouldn't have mattered, but now it did. She also realised why she'd been reluctant to contact her other selves. If she was in their position, she would have seen a clear danger that had to be killed as quickly as possible. She had no liking for unnecessary conflicts, especially with her biochemistry still in flux. Fortunately, Akari had always known that the gift, along with the introduction, was a useful tool in diplomacy. It was easy enough to discourage the children from further participation. The information intelligence phase was often dull, but there was always the possibility of something exciting. The planning and analysis phase was always boring all throughout. She was just going to shut in and vegetate for a few more days, but her time was too valuable to waste on little tricks to impress them. She needed control, full concentration. It made them resent her a little bit, but it was important. She stressed again, necessary, but boring. Once they were done, she turned to the significance of the safe house having a tiled floor. As a cardinal safe house, the wall corners were also pointed to each of the 4 directions. Starting from the north, she counted 9 tiles diagonally down. She carefully pried it open to expose a small metal box. Shinji Ikari didn't know the Class 4 safe houses. He had some vague knowledge of what was inside and what they were, but as last-ditch locations they were better left unused. There were other more accessible and more comfortable safe houses for general use. So it was that he had commanded a certain spot be dedicated to hold a message to the future if ever he travelled back in time. Just in case. Empty. She sighed in relief. Counting from the south end, 9th tile, a box just in case the time travel extended for a few weeks rather than months or years. Empty. She realised she'd been sweating. She sighed again. Good. There might still be something in that special safety deposit box, or if the event went for more than a few hundred years, she might have to go prospecting over at Mount High. She didn't think it likely there would be anything further. She didn't consider it strange that such variables must be eliminated first before crafting a plan. There was nothing bad about being sure about the problem and the factors surrounding it. Wait. She looked around the room again. She began to count off 9 tiles from the east. There was one more box there. She'd no idea what it was about, but for symmetry's sake she was sure there was another contained 9 tiles from the west corner. She opened it, and within was an index card. Printed on it was, "Speak to the Yakuza." She went over to the last box, and inside it was another card. Remember, ignorance is bliss. After her earlier brief moment of panic, by Ayanami's standards, what most people felt as vague apprehension, she decided that the easiest way to keep from having to fight Akari and Ayanami for her own existence was not to give them any reason to attack her in the first place. She was technically their daughter. It had better be a damn good reason. Her own plans had the problem of not interfering with others already in place. Why waste time trying to retill grounds that were already seeded? As she slept, the greatest danger they faced was Seal. Her own resources were limited, but she could help there in ways much subtler and more effective. Or she could yank out about 1,000,000 yen in non-consequential bills from one of the cashiers around the city, check into the best hotel in Kyoto too, and spend a week gorging on ice cream and action movies. She held that sweet moment of sanity for a few moments longer, then went to work. There was another disturbing thought as she prepared her disguise. Most humans were narcissistic to some degree. It was a natural component of being alive. Even Shinji Ikari had that flaw. Rei Ayanami, though Japanese, shouldn't really have been introduced to samurai literature. It only further reinforced her belief that the truest love was loyalty, and her value was only to be spent in the service of another. Perhaps it was that part of her which was so reluctant to reveal herself to Akari. She wouldn't dare tell him what to do. The furthest she could bring herself to do was to tug at his shirt and give a look of quiet yearning. It was the sort of face that made Shinji want to hug her and kiss the top of her head and breathe in her scent and protect her forever. At which point Mayobuki would give out a little squeal and surrender into the urge to do just that. Too much moe. As she pondered the way to braid her now long black hair, she gaped. Wow, I am cute. She could use this. Another asset Shinji lacked. She licked her lips and put on a beret. Hiding in plain sight, it seems, would be easier than she'd first assumed. The train to Kyoto was full of people. Most workers didn't really live in Tokyo 3, but commuted on a daily or weekly basis. It was a trade-off between high pay and the potential lethality of working there. There was a risky moment as the group went past crystal strands designed to either excess psychic energy or the utter absence of it, as in an AT field. Fortunately, her brain emitted just the right of psychic energy as any normal human, just as the Ava had two components for controlling the AT field, the physical brain of the Ava and the core. By all rights, the Ava should have massive psychic presence. Why should it control the AT field in the first place? The firmament separating between them was the known principle of physics. Was there a difference between the psychic energy produced by human minds or angels themselves? Maybe that was actually what made it work. An AT field was a field. It's a location of movement. It was not, by itself, something capable of containing force in existence. Just as light itself was both wave and particle, she wondered if they had taken the first step into a greater duality. She resisted the urge to chuckle. And as usual, like the international network before impact, the first use human beings had for potentially paradigm technologies was to weaponize it. It was a warehouse, and under the skylight a bunch of goons were playing cards. Then there was a sound of breaking glass and a shadow slammed into the table. The metal frame was strong enough to take its meagre weight, but it seemed to loom large before their eyes. Its red eyes glowed with hellfire, and its long black hair floated down like folding wings. One of the goons pulled out a gun, then yelped in pain. The gun fell to his feet, sliced into two clean pieces. One of the closer goons felt himself being yanked up with unholy strength to its eye level. Where is your Oyabun? It asked with cold hostility. Babbling, crying, the thug denied knowing anything. It was a girl, and then she smiled. They screamed. Miss, we're here, at Kyoto 2 Hotel. She blinked. Oh, thank you. She paid the man and got out of the taxi. She rubbed at her eyes under her large round sunglasses. She was still getting used to having to separate reality from daydream from dream from memory. Right, fun as that may be, it was much easier to just ask Takita-san about the alternative sources they were using. From there it was just a simple phone call to asking about the man in charge. The one at the other end was quite uncooperative about his boss's location. Bitch! Do you know who you're talking to? Until he was asked to trace the call. It was from Tokyo 3, the in his complex in Cerberus base, and did he know who he was talking to? Oh, my life is dirt. The Yakuza were unpleasant people, but not even impact could really break them. Like it or not, every society had its criminal element, and while organisation did allow a greater reach of perfidy, it stood that such organisations were also self-policing. They knew that the greatest profit lay in maintaining a peaceful, ordered society. There was only wealth when others had the ability to produce said wealth, and the reason why even the wealthiest crime lord had only a fraction of Zaibatsu, the great companies. It is in light that the grain grows, she thought as she entered. The assorted thugs were roaming around, frightening the hotel staff and possible customers. The families were meeting to discuss recent events. The return of the Earth's cradle in Europe, even that had consequences affecting them. Shinji Ikari had left hints all over the place, just in case he ever lost his memory. Why he decided to entrust those to the Yakuza, or similar parties, was mysterious at first glance. The first reason was that it wasn't something most would expect. The second reason was that the Yakuza, even if they did know what they were holding, weren't in any position to make use of it. The third? Because in their own way, they were actually quite loyal. They'd always known their existence depended upon working at the fringes of society. No matter how tough or powerful their soldiers thought they were, the truth was that they could not stand up to a true organised effort by the military or government in rooting them out. It was a fortunate irony such methods were available only to the tyrannical regimes, and that their better option would be to ingratiate and have shadowy affairs become legitimised. Ironically, the criminal element was also often seed options for a nascent resistance. Wealth and power were two different things. Shinji possessed both. To many it was inevitable. His father would die from age or enemies, at which point the boy would inherit nerve, and by extension of influence the rest of the country. Even greater irony that they were the ones most fervently waiting for him to become Emperor of Japan. Risk all to gain all. At no other point could they hope to obtain power greater than what they already possessed. The only way to increase was for society itself to grow even more. Social parasites there may be, but it was an entirely rational form of patriotism. Rei Ayanami saw them as convenient targets to be thrown around for fun and experience. But, as they'd hoped, Shinji Ikari did have a certain fondness for them, if at least for the higher-ups who tried to convince themselves they were still samurai. That's a fucking helicopter. Okay. The guard scowled as she approached, a few leering in anticipation. Her hair began to shorten, to turn blue. She took off her sunglasses. As she passed, she could smell urine. It was a dignified gathering, if many of the faces still looked quite disreputable in their expensively tailored suits. There were rituals and customs to be observed that added up into a semi-romantic mythos built around their existence. They may be criminals, true, but they did possess their own brand of honour. Or at least that's what they wanted the public to believe. There was utter silence as she entered. The restaurant staff didn't know what was going on, but anything that could frighten that many Yakuza all at the same time was not good, and they skedaddled forthwith.
You? But we had a deal!
One of the elder heads shouted, in a voice he hoped was loud but non-threatening. I am altering the deal. Pray I do not alter it any further. Some of the guards looked like they wanted to pull out guns, but then decided it was pointless. Some of them looked on the verge of crying. She wanted to laugh, but didn't want to cause outright panic. She turned to the one who dared speak up. And you are? If he was insulted that she didn't remember, he didn't show it. He bowed deeply. I am Hugo Katsuhiro, Ayanami-sama. Any relationship to Hugo Makoto? A distant cousin. She'd asked that before, but who was he to question a kami on her whims? That blood relationship was likely the reason she'd be more lenient to his own house. Has something happened? We are, as always, in your service. What have I been up to? This is getting creepy. The time has come. You have something that I require. The old man let out a deep breath. He looked strong and fit for his age, and her words seemed to fill him with renewed energy. Bring it here, he ordered imperiously to his own underlings. Soon enough, the lacquered box was in his hands. With much more humility, he presented it to the girl. As he has commanded, we kept it nearby, but well protected, for the moment he needs it again. Finally, he was rid of it. He had too many nightmares about it somehow getting loose. If he had a choice, he would have locked it in the thickest safe he could find and dropped it into the ocean. The only reason he felt reasonably safe about having to carry it around was that being on the move kept it from settling in, and that only a thorough idiot would contemplate trying to steal or destroy it. She bowed gratefully, took it and opened the box. Everyone else screamed and dived for cover. After a few more moments, they looked up to see she was still intact, and wondering why they were so scared about a little piece of grey rock. She poked at it with her left index finger. Yep, just a rock. Take it away, please. She nodded. You have my thanks. Please, do continue to enjoy yourselves. They were left wondering if that was meant sarcastically, as a threat, or simple politeness. In any case, they decided it was best to just break out the booze. That had been too damn close for comfort. She sat on a bench, in a park, and was starting to draw appreciative glances for her all-black ensemble. But for Carrie and Ayanami had a tendency to focus on a problem to the exclusion of all other things, including time and pain. She crossed her legs, exposing a bit of skin between her thigh-high stockings and the miniskirt, and turned the box around and around over her knee. It was square, about 8 inches all around. As far as she could tell, it was made of paper, papyrus even, with multiple layers of opaque lacquer adding rigidity and a transparent layer protecting the faint decorative pictographs in white lines. Odd, in that lacquer work was primarily Far East Asian. The equivalent in the Near East was glazed pottery. The cover was fixed to the box body by strips of cured dark hide, glued in place. The inside had soft leather to protect both contents and the inner finishings from bumps and scratches. It was just a box. The rock was about fist-sized, cool grey in colour and somewhat crumbly. The taste was blech, as expected. It was not radioactive, nor possessed any psychic presence. It was a rock. It wasn't a puzzle she could solve either, by breaking it open to figure out how it works, or throwing thousands of man-hours of someone else's research at it. Hello there, pretty lady. Waiting for someone? She looked up to see a tall, slim young man in a blazer jacket. His hair had blonde highlights, carefully sculpted into points. He had the sort of that androgynous good looks, laced with just a hint of danger, that reduced teenage girls into puddles of glee. Wait no more. It's such a beautiful day. Why don't we have some ice cream? It's gotta be hot sitting out in the sun in those colours. Or the lack of said colours. She narrowed her eyes behind the round sunglasses. She wasn't impressed. Shinji Ikari had that vaguely effeminate look as well, but like the original characters that popularised the Bishonen look in the first place, court heroes of mythical history, it was all about deception, about how one may seem to be fragile yet be capable of kicking so much ass. Still, he seemed fairly harmless. He had the confidence of someone born with wealth and having gotten into good schools upon his own intellectual merits. The twinkle in his eyes revealed that he knew just how much of a self-important twit he sounded, and was waiting for her to either like it or look past it. He had approached simply because she looked so different from the usual loud or overly affectionate girls that surrounded him. Sit, she gestured beside her. There is a puzzle that concerns me, and you might help me solve it. Sure, what's the problem? He grinned and sat down, making sure to lean back away from her, his arm drifting close on the bench's back. I'm Hanagebo Sosuke, by the way. Good to meet you, Hanagebo-san. You may call me now Raka. Do you see anything out of the ordinary about these items? He took the box. Weird girl. Good thing she had a nice body. I don't know. What are these little squiggles here? This is an antique, right? He took out the rock from inside and inspected it. He sniffed at it. This is a rock. As I had feared, she sighed again. Is it supposed to be a metaphor? She was starting to get the idea that perhaps the whole point was just to get out of the city, but there was no reason to terrify the Yakuza to such an extent. He was starting to get the feeling she'd be more trouble than she was worth. Don't you mean Madame? She wasn't paying attention anymore, having leaned forward to put her elbows on her knees so she could lace together her fingers under her nose. Her sunglasses glinted. Sosuke shook his head and put down the box, placing the rock on top of it. Excuse me, but it seems I've forgotten about a dentist appointment. He turned away, then stopped. Did you say something? His eyes glazed over. He looked at the girl with the grimly focused face, to the things beside her, then back to her. A look of horror replaced dumb bliss. Hurriedly, he opened up the box, threw the rock inside, and shut it firmly. Are you crazy? He shouted, his voice breaking. What the hell are you doing walking around with something like that? She blinked and looked up. What? Can't you tell how wrong it? No. Oh, I see. He looked amazed. You don't see. You can't even feel that it's not supposed to be here. Raka picked up the box and held it up. He flinched. Ah! Keep that disgusting thing away from me! Damn it, Inanna! Why can't you just leave it well enough alone? He clutched at his head. What am I saying? You have just referred to me as Inanna. A grim glimmer was in her eyes. You will explain yourself. Now. I don't know what... Stay away from me! He fled, stumbling, his face frozen in mindless terror. Others around the park kept their gazes averted. Whatever weirdness was going on there was none of their business. The girl looked like the creepy stalker type anyway. She opened up the box and inspected the insides. Nothing had changed. She shrugged. Technically, Soryu was more of an Inanna or Ishtar prologue as a lady of war, the proto-Athena. She'd expected something more on the grounds of Kishar or some moon goddess. She blinked. She felt another headache coming on. I need to stop applying parallels with divinity to myself. It never ends well. She tried one more time with her taxi driver taking her back to the train station. At first there was nothing strange that he could discern. A box and a rock. Even a few seconds looking at it while waiting for the traffic lights to change made that obvious. Then, looking for something further, all of a sudden his eyes flicked into open fear. Get out, he hissed, all but throwing the closed box back into her grasp. I'm not having that thing here any longer.
Which one? The box or the rock?
Don't make me think about it anymore. His eyes were screed shut. He was sweating visibly. Get out!
But we are in the middle of traffic.
As soon as the lights changed, the taxi swerved to the curb and disgorged a confused girl. The driver then roared off at full speed, desperate to get away from her.
This is getting annoying.
As long as she didn't draw any particular attention to it, it seemed that no one found anything disturbing about it. No one found anything strange about her carrying it on the train, and she passed the monitors of Tokyo 3 without any further incident. She dreamed she was in a place that was cold and dark and desolate. Jagged rocks provided cover, even as both sides had night vision gear and body armour. Fighting devolved into brutal, close-in skirmishes. It was Ararat, shrouded in mist.
Many who have never really suffered begin to deny God based upon the narrative of the Bible, which leads to a certain paradox in that one cannot really loathe a being that doesn't exist based upon things that it did not do.
Nagisa, she heard herself hiss.
I thought you wanted to be free of Seal's influence.
She looked around but couldn't find him.
Why are you here?
I am here because you called me, no more and no less. The voice returned, somewhere off to the left and behind her.
At the roof of the world, you chose to accept the mantle of leadership. Here at the spine of the world, you accepted the curse of that responsibility. Enough with the drama. I do not need you to bring me false flattery. If you have something to say, then say it. Otherwise, be gone.
Yes, well, if you would do me a favour and stop with that form. The hybrid was pointedly looking away. Trust me, it's hard enough trying to converse with you in person. Shinji and Rei both possessed a healthy dislike of Kaoru. The feeling within her was an exponential increase.
Even in my dreams, you're freaky. Give me a reason not to tear you limb from limb.
Because, as you had said, this is a dream. It may be cathartic, but pointless. You've grown far too used to voices in your head, but much as you miss the four, they belong to him. Not even in your dreams can you dare to try and recreate their essential presence. Thus, you have me. You may hate me, Ikari-kun, or Ayanami-san, but as enemies at least we have respect for each other's intelligence. Odd indeed that you can recreate me with such completeness.
Including the ability to lie about it, I presume.
You presume correctly, he replied with a grin.
Annoying as ever. If you're just an expression of my psyche, there's nothing you can tell me that I do not already know.
That is true. However, truth itself may be clad in metaphor. What you hold is indeed a metaphor, in much the same way that fire could be a flower, or death is a patient lover, or that the map is not the territory, or even that in the beginning there was the word.
And you are here because, like it or not, I cannot help but think of Shinji as an enemy, or at the very least an opponent against whom I must prove my existence.
She nodded.
An uncomfortable truth, but I will deal with it.
She watched her mercenaries engage fire with SEAL Special Forces. The forces she commanded weren't quite as well trained or fanatic in their defence, but the weight of bolter fire overcame that barrier. Absently, she watched a grisly performance of the Mark II in his Judgment Bolt round. They were finely fitted with mass reactive tips. The bolts exploded inside enemies, showering the area with shrapnel. Some of the enemies died from shrapnel composed of the bones of their comrades. Blood and meat chunks stained rock walls. She felt no shame or disgust. She walked, Nagisa following close by, passing one of the burly mercenaries vomiting into a rock wall. It was a glorious slaughter.
I see. So this is why he decided to step up Carapace armor production.
Accidental injuries from friendly fire increased when everyone involved used high explosive rockets. They are hardened killers, Ikari-kun, but even they are not used to this level of carnage. This is how you want us to fight? Some of these men, gesturing to the fallen SEAL operatives, had families, and all of them had their own hopes and dreams. Did they deserve this?
Deserving death is not an issue. Artillery has ever been indiscriminate. It's just that he has allowed it to happen on an infantry level. Conventional rifle rounds wouldn't have sufficed against the body armour these operatives wear. Overkill is to err on the side of caution.
She pointed out what was happening in the clearing. I now remember that the carnage encouraged the rest of the defenders to surrender far sooner than anticipated. Without the spark of life, all flesh is meat. Karu nodded. You know, we're not so different, you and I. We have no time for useless sentimentality. He that kills himself to avoid misery fears it, and at the best shows but a bastard valour. This life's a force committed to my trust, which I must not yield up till it be forced, nor rely. He's not valiant that dares die, but he that boldly bears calamity. Karu smiled, pleased at the reference. They lived Gothic lives, in the Ray City sort of way, and he liked in humanity the paradox of how others find unbearable the pain of easy living. Precisely! Death is no redemption, not for those as us. The historical arc should have decayed by now. What was it that I sought here? The answer you already know, but not the question that leads to it. Not how old is mankind, not how worthy is humanity, but who is human? They entered the cave and paused before a thick steel door marked with Seal's seven-eyed symbol. Her fingers dug into the metal and she wrenched it loose. I have become a monster for the sake of what we must accomplish. The angels I can pity somewhat. If they could just find another planet to settle, I might let them alone. It would be interesting to study active evolution. She nodded at Karu's modus operandi. I will kill you, of course, but that doesn't mean I do not envy your ability to experiment. Seal, however, I will not rest until they have been brought to justice for all that they have done. The alien and the mutant will be fought out of necessity, but these traitors and heretics must be purged to the last. Fighting continued, and the two walked through it all like ghosts. In the end they reached a stone altar in the deepest part of the cave. It is said that Adam's body did not decay, and was passed down from father to son, and was carried by Noah in his ark until it could be laid to rest in the centre of the earth, which is, as you now know, semantic key for the creation of the Evangelion, whose flesh will persist until the universe's own cold demise. Do you know how far back that mental image drills into the human psyche? Ha! Giants of all kinds walked the earth, and early man slew them and ate them. Man was a beast among beasts, until one day something changed. She found she once more carried the box. What is this damn thing anyway? Also a metaphor. All right, that does it. Eat fish, snack, peace, my cousin. And remember, whose research did he require for the recovery of that artifact? Dr. Henry Jones, Jr. A contract is a metaphor as well. It is not the piece of paper in itself, but the legal entity that comes with two parties agreeing to an exchange of goods or services. All it does is state the terms of said contract and turn a verb into a noun. Now think, the law follows you where you walk. You have always been a walking blasphemy, but the universe accepts your existence. How could any mere object be more disturbing than that? Shinji Ikari didn't even know he possessed such a potent tool, for to know of it was to lose it. That was his end, the eventuality written by Keel through the formulas of creation, and the prophecies could only affect what was directly stated. Such things were always vague, not just because of the difficulty in describing the formless, but because such wriggle room was essential for free will. What was significant was in what was missing. She touched a finger to her lips to hold back an unkind chuckle. Wrong. Before the word there was silence. A god that we could comprehend must necessarily be ruthless and immoral. That is, it could not be bound by the same laws that it demands we follow. The executioner is necessary to prevent murderers from committing any more crimes, no matter how hypocritical such an office may be. It does so by abstaining from the need to perform the same acts that led to sin in the first place. Sexless, fateless, faceless. You know that awe and fear are kin, and something we cannot understand is terrible beyond imagining. It was easier to lay secular power upon chieftains and mystics. Karu stared down at the altar. This was how it used to be.
quid pro quo, cause and effect, a contract with God. They prayed in secret, for God could not be bribed. Only occasionally must the covenant be renewed. This is an old place, Ikari-kun. Here Neanderthals etched their souls in smoke and dreams. It is one of the points where the moon cradle may snag subjects for teleportation. You make it sound so mundane. At a time when ice blanketed most of Europe, when mankind itself was in its infancy, already we battled the Great Mother. Everything else, even you, is a side effect of that victory. She placed the box on the altar and clasped both palms together as if in prayer. Did they have names? Not as we can understand them. They didn't have words, you see, but they had perfect recall and the means to transmit that. This in the end was their fatal flaw, and they lost themselves in their own godhood, instrumentality by accident, and thus we won the world from what could have been an idiot god. Seriously? That's your explanation for the Homo sapiens' dead-end speciations? Instead of something like environmental pressure? Humans have gone extinct in places before, starving to death or migrating en masse. We are still part of the animal kingdom, with all the physical needs that implied. Recall that humanity was brought to the brink of extinction once before, for reasons no one could really explain. Despite having spread through most of the globe, early humans were wiped out all over but the tip of southern Africa, suspiciously close to Antarctica, where Adam slept. Interesting if true. A lesser instrumentality, unlike the total, worldwide, omni-species instrumentality that Seal plans. We are all the living word, Ayanami-san. Consider the analogy. Before the word, before intelligent thought, there is indeed nothing. Animals have nothing. They live and they die and they do not matter. They do not have it. Godhood comes to that which can perceive it. The word is an abstract concept, existing as a shadow of something that is, a link to what must be. It is timeless, bringing to us the ability to view both past and future. Evolution is random, but this is strength that has no direct value, but rewards massively its bearer. Our minds have shaped the word, and in turn been shaped by it. We have grown, we have prospered, and all because we have not forgotten. Language. No. Symbolism. Does it actually provide defense, or does it make Lilith wake up even faster? You have this power, and yet you fail to understand. You may have all the nations of this world under your heel. You may have the Evangelions do your bidding. But until you understand what you are fighting, you will not win. It is not by wealth and influence alone that Seal sought supremacy. The world. You're talking about the Kabbalistic formulas? Or Enlil's me? The word is the law. We define this universe and are defined in turn. Before the word, before being able to pass on skills and knowledge to the next generation in the form of external instruction, there can be no God that we can recognize. Humanity was a beast. Before the word, any society could be likened to a pack of wolves. The most any leader could command was to those he could physically intimidate, and it would never last beyond his own lifetime. The word is immortal, and affects those yet unborn. We bring the unchanging into the days that die away, and ask to control the unpredictable wilderness that batter our spirit. Cave paintings, and the beginning of music. These too are expressions of the word. The power over instinct. The hand of the divine requires it be recognized as such. The early man sought to control nature through God, even as they surrendered their own fears to the ether. God is a concept self-perpetuating through time. God is the why and the how, that the seasons come in regular patterns, that animals and plants obey an invisible order. God is the word that tells us, become! God is an event, Ikari-kun. This is why Seal can move on with such confidence. Nevertheless, it has its physical power. Otherwise, why should Kill master the Kabbalistic mysteries, nor the secret Dead Sea Scrolls possess accurate prophecies? Closer and closer, you are looking for ways to counter it, to grasp power that you do not have. The words were nearby, almost to her ears. But still you miss the point. You are locked in the fallacies of temporal power. Adam and Lilith are functionally identical. If Adam creates angels and humanity is born of Lilith, it stands to reason we are also angels. Are you saying it is the fate of all higher order intelligence to be consumed by instrumentality? As contrast to what was said earlier, from too much hope of living, from hope and fear set free, we thank with brief thanksgiving, whatever gods may be, that no life lives forever, that dead men rise up never, that even the weariest river rides somewhere safe to sea. The Garden of Proserpine is refuge at the end of a species' struggles. It may seem as if Lilith, with emphasis on the small creatures and physically limited evolution, is a methodology of quality over quantity, but the opposite is true. It is Adam, with its many varied forms, that fills the void with star song. Yet do you know how powerful it could be? A living planet, a world beast, a sapient solar system, galaxia unbound? The power of Lilith is invisible compared to the absolute territory that is solidified potential in the universe she reaches out from the immaterium. What you may call psychic energy is a manifestation of a being that doesn't yet exist and a potentium rave that still echoes through time. To be human is to live. What is life? When flesh becomes the word, that is instrumentality. We will have power beyond what we can imagine, and we will be invincible. Because we would not really exist in the universe anymore. That's what Seal wants. Energy, even thought patterns writ in the quantum sea, while it cannot be created nor destroyed, may be exhausted. Still, even as the war in heaven continues, at least humanity will not know of it. Universes within universes, layers of reality. In fact, there's no real way of proving that this is but a memory of instrumentality, being played out again and again. No, life is strength. She shook her head. This is not to be contested. It seems obvious enough. We live. We affect our world. We haven't lost yet. In this instance, we agree. Seal must not be allowed to initiate instrumentality. Humanity is the final angel, one being unknowing. God is not dead, merely asleep. Carol shrugged. This is a dream. You and I, what will happen to us when she wakes up? Do you want to die? Better than having to be around you any more than necessary. You still have not enlightened me on the issues that I can actually use. Then listen to me, little Miss Warmonger. Whatever grudges you have against Seal is childish pique compared to my grievances. You have not suffered as I have suffered. You have not knelt as a slave. You have not killed as a weapon. And my makers I will destroy with my own hands. Vengeance is my right. Many horrors have mankind committed in the name of religion and assorted creeds, but all of that pales before what Seal has done. It was worse than genocide. They have stolen mankind's future. I have my own precognitives, and beyond a year from now there is nothing but chaos. Adam's rebirth has weakened the fabric of time and space. It was necessary to pave the way for complete instrumentality and the death of both Adam and Lilith. Whatever other hang-ups you may have, remember this. Someone else is closer to being a god than you can ever have with billions shouting your name. Belief alone will not make it so. A trigger is necessary. I am the herald that you do not acknowledge. I am that which will take your place when you fall. What you deny I will accept. What you fail to do I will complete. Hate me if you must. Do not fear me if you are that arrogant. But ignore my warnings at your peril. Prepare. She opened her eyes and blinked. She had to remind herself that even in her dreams, Nagisa could still be lying about everything. She groaned. She was meant for intense life and death struggles, not that semantic bullshit so followed around and irritated Akari. She thought she was finally free of that. And it was morning. It was a frontier, and it was frightening. They all lived at a knife's edge, and it was so exciting. In-His had sunk and fortified many shelters around Tokyo 3, at no cost to the city or nerve, but as the city's population ballooned, more and more were being sunk each day. The city rang with unceasing industry, but even this was one more note in a song. A child singing to himself in the dark, trying to drive away the fear.
The noise might draw the wolves instead, but still he sings. She watched it rebuild from the watery ruin of but a few days ago. There remained several empty blocks, but otherwise the city seemed fresh and ready. It wasn't so much recovery as regeneration. It was like a great machine cell with nerve at its nucleus. Tokyo 3's defences seemed perfect. No expense was spared. The only vulnerability of the Evangelion was its pilot, and they were protected behind overlapping layers of security. Even such as I, trying to blitz through the defences, would fail. Positron cannon turrets and supporting las cannon carrying interceptors could engage inbound nukes. Not in overwhelming number, perhaps, but the web of alliances that both Ikaris had bound the nations of the world ensured this would not happen. This is the jewel of human civilization. Ikari must have already delivered to them the Outer Space Initiative for once this war is done. She looked up at the sky. Unfortunately, Nagisa was already space-capable. Shinji Ikari would have to either destroy him quickly or continue the fight star by star. He gives them hope. Let us just get through this and the stars are ours. Humanity must never be brought to the brink of extinction ever again. It is so absurdly simple that I am not surprised to see that it works. Many others had voiced such projects in the past, but Ikari was the first to bring not just the ideals but the very means to accomplish it. He didn't have to beg for their funding. They must follow or they'll be left behind. The children, the Evangelions, Ritsuko Akagi. This city is too valuable. To lose it is to lose the key to easy and practical FTL. She looked up. Therefore, the enemy would seek to destroy it utterly. Ikari and Nagisa, each in their own way refusing the concept of instrumentality. A hostile trinity. Kodama Haraki hummed as she walked down Tokyo 3's main avenue. She loved the city. It had its problems, sure, just like she had her own problems, but they were solvable in time. Unfortunately, despite what Makoto Hyuga may have learned from someone else's situation, a threesome dip didn't really resolve anything. The eldest Haraki had to figure out ways of completely claiming her boyfriend's attention on the times they were together. Kaede Agano just had too much advantage being a co-worker. She growled a bit. Kodama paused as she passed the cafe ruined in Leilul's first attack. The memory of that day brought a smile back to her face. Haraki-san. Kodama turned and recoiled from a face too close to her own. She saw a girl with large round sunglasses, long black hair, a red beret, a blue jacket and a green dress. Yes? We need to talk, Haraki-san. It's quite important. The eldest Haraki looked at her watch. Look, I'm running late, so... Sorry. You can check back later at the studio, okay? The girl sighed and pulled in her sunglasses a bit, exposing intense red eyes. You paint a mural in time, Haraki-san, and do not know it. Now we must protect you from the others that swim between life and death. Who? You are Haraki. That's enough to make you a target. But please, there's no need to fear. The girl pointed over to the cafe. Come, let's have some coffee. Kodama tried to look nonplussed, while her left hand went to her purse. She had a choice between a handgun or the alert button on her cell phone. She pressed the button and followed the strange girl. They sat facing each other. The eldest Haraki gave in to the impulse and pulled at the girl's long hair. Ow, the girl whispered, her head being pulled along. Kodama frowned, somewhat envious. Shiny but silken. Too perfect, but real hair. Okay, now who are you, and why the hell do you look like Shinji Ikari as a girl? Landon Bradley hated the city. He was a psyker, that was a given. He sneered at passers-by, who drew back and muttered about crass gaijin. They destroyed his life. All humans were said to be psychic to some degree, and he just had a little bit more than the usual. For all the assurances that it would just be temporary. Think that job would still be waiting when he returned? How many would agree to make $1 million advertising deals with a known psyker? How many women would still think he was just that naturally charming instead of somehow messing with their minds? The fact he'd never really needed nor known of such an advantage wouldn't save his reputation. They'd ruined him. He was pulled from life at the top of the social strata and reduced to... what? One more cog in the assembly line for superconductor strands and capacitor crystal production? It was a mindless, repetitive task, except that it consumed all his mental attention. It was rather easy. All he had to do was sit and listen to music. It was beautiful. Others sang songs lost in antiquity. Others, buoyed by feeling, danced in defiance of death. It was art wrought in time. It was part of what made him so bitter. Once it was done, he was left feeling stripped of his soul, reaching ineffectually for something that was beyond his ability to even understand. Every single day he was made whole and broken again. What did he care about the distrust and sometimes blatant racism? The mundanes weren't worthy even of his contempt. He lived in a one-room apartment, and though paid generously every week, inflation was starting to dent his purchasing power. It was an inconvenience he could live with. That they played with his soul he would never be able to forgive. He passed a wall of TV sets in the general goods store and scowled some more. Gendo Ikari was the one to address the press. No one trusted what he was saying, but the information he offered freely was accepted as the best they would ever get, no matter how deep they might try to dig. Bradley had to admit, Gendo Ikari had a truly magnificent sneer.
The Cradle are a sideshow. They have already failed. This is where the angels attack. They can cower in Europe all they want. They are entirely superfluous. If they are not with us, they are against us. The world cannot spare the resources for two competing defenders, especially if one's proved to be useless and prone to backstabbing the people they pretend to protect.
What about the accusations that Nerve intends to trigger Third Impact?
Nerve's mandate is to kill the angels and prevent Third Impact. No amount of Nagisa's rhetoric or outright lies can change that. Do we have the means to do so? The answer is classified. The world is full of idiots who would only try to risk the world's demise just to stroke their own egos.
This is bullshit, man. Bullshit, the Psyker muttered. We're all gonna die and there's no place far enough to run.
If it doesn't matter where you are, then why are you still here?
He didn't turn, but looked at a reflection on the mirror. It was a girl about shoulder high in height to his own. Her long black hair was arranged into two braids that looped around her neck. With a large round sunglasses on her face, her age was indeterminate, but his mind rang with jailbait warnings. He began to turn away, but was stopped by a gentle tug on his jacket sleeve.
You look like you're having a bad day. Why not try to relax a bit?
Girl, I'm not that stupid. Try it on someone else.
Oh, don't worry. I don't intend to roll you for money. Or anything else, really. I would deem it a very big favour if you can answer a few questions.
She tilted her head aside.
Please?
I don't have time for this.
On the contrary, Mr. Bradley, time is all you have.
She let go and shrugged.
After all, what are you going to do? Go home and brood? Try to see if there's anything on the TV in a language you can understand?
Sadly, the listening in tongues bit only worked on human brains in conversation, not electronics. The Psyker's handsome face twisted into another disfiguring scowl. Who are you? His hand drifted to its pocket and a crystal there. Are you from the Cradle? Can you get me out of here? She smiled a bit.
Try not to sound too eager. I already know the Cradle offered you a way out.
She began walking around him.
In fact, that is what I'm curious about. In many ways you are the stereotypical perfect target for their temptations. Why'd you refuse?
I really don't think that's any of your business, he snarled back. And I got that plant anyway. You people should already know that. If not the Cradle, then who else would send out creepy kids to do their dirty work?
Worry not, Bradley-san. I am a power on the line to either Nerve or the Cradle, though my sympathies are more in line with Shinji Ikari.
She pointed to a nearby cafe.
Let us talk, Bradley-san. It may be possible to improve your situation in a way that is completely legal and harms no one.
I doubt that. You don't know the lawyers that the Sakana hired to write up our contracts.
It's the governments that make laws, however. He had never intended for this to be a permanent arrangement. Psychics are essential for FTL communication.
Mere lawyers couldn't possibly be any more than a rope bump if she really needed to force it through.
Some sort of Psychers Guild is a step in the right direction. Who would those be?
Stab and Cut. They're from Los Angeles.
Oh, Lord,
the girl groaned, rubbing at the bridge of her nose.
Can they possibly be any more obvious? I am so going to kick their asses.
Ah, so you do know their reputation?
She nodded. Against bureaucracy, all heroes strive in vain.
Ryoko Koiso was mostly ambivalent about the city. She was the heir to the Koiso School of Martial Arts, but even her big gorilla of a father couldn't beat up the government. Unfair as it may seem, there was a difference in the treatment between foreign and local-born psychers. It was sort of refreshing to be part of a school that had no delinquents in it. Just because she knew martial arts didn't mean she went out looking for fights, and it didn't help that her boyfriend was apparently the strongest thug in town. That he was actually a flower-happy pacifist despite his looks only aggravated the situation. It was a crazy coincidence that the entire Katano gang transferred to Tokyo 3, in her and her best friend's case because of latent psychic potential, 2 in a single town, quite a fortunate rarity, the others because of their parents' employment opportunities, and some because old favours were being called in. They transferred in as seniors. Kuroda learned early on that Tokyo 3 First Municipal Junior High, and wasn't that just a sterile, personality-less name, had no need for a school guardian. It didn't matter how strong you were, for Hiraki-san would just shoot you in the groin. The pecking order was set. Ryoko found that she liked the quiet, being in the background, the chance to really get some uninterrupted studying done. She did like physical exertion though. Her long hair flowed freely behind her as she ran through alleys, jumping or ducking under obstacles. She changed into sensible dark pants and a jacket. Tokyo 3's pale green uniform was a bit too breezy and fragile, and for some reason bucked the tradition of a sailor fuku. She could have earned a bit more pocket money with the strand spinners, even with her low level of ability, but the chance for meaningful action that Hiraki offered, that she couldn't refuse. Seiichiro Katano followed, of course, to protect her even if the thought of harming another living being was completely anathema to his beliefs. The rest of the gang followed to protect him, which is why they were all running pell-mell down Tokyo 3's crowded industrial district, obvious as all hell. They emerged into a small clearing boxed between warehouses, where a slim girl dressed all in black stood in the centre of a circle of unconscious men in red-trimmed jumpsuits. For a moment Ryoko felt a pang of envy. No one should have hair that sleek and lustrous, drifting softly even in a slight breeze. The girl sighed. I managed to evade the attention of the alphabet soups, and who manages to trip up my plans? A bunch of meddling kids. She looked up. Would you believe there's a really, really good reason why I'm standing here surrounded by Mold in his technicians and a suitcase nuke in my hands? To her credit, Ryoko did not hesitate. Get her! She pointed. Behind her, 2 other teens rushed at the strange girl. Raka could only blink in disbelief. 2 were both rather short, and given how petite Rei Ayanami's frame was, that was something. Oh fuck. I see they have been informed that tactical nuclear devices will not go off if dropped. In fact, it might even destroy the trigger mechanism. Cracking the seal would also render it useless, if flooding the immediate area with radiation. The one from the right had bleached spiky blonde hair and seemed to have no compunction about hitting a girl. She kicked Takahisha in the face. He went down. The one from the left had neck-length black hair, a delicate doll-like, for some reason preferred to wear a dark blue sailor fuku even out of school, and apparently no hesitation against committing violence to anything. Raka blocked a high kick with her left forearm, stepped back from a flurry of punches, skipped over a sweep, and saw a straight punch coming. She also managed to block that one. Unfortunately, she did so with her face. There was an audible crack, and Ikuno Shirataki stepped back, painfully cradling her wrist. Round black sunglasses glinted. While it is impressive that Hiraki-san already has an effective inquisitorial retinue, this may be far beyond your pay grade. The tactical nuclear device was kicked out from her hands. Hey! She felt arms wrap around her ankles. Ryoko rushed to grab it with a lunge to make any football receiver proud. The Angel Hybrid paused and looked up at the sky, as if asking why was it so damn hard just to get anything productive done without all this hassle. Right. Like this is going to stop me. She flipped into a handstand, flinging the teen thug around as if he was the tip of a lance, and striking at the fleeing girl's back. The metal suitcase tumbled out of her hands. Crap! 3 voices said at the same time, the moment seeming to stretch on. The device landed on someone else's thin but capable arms. Above them was a pallid face, almost as pale as her own, she realised, with slicked back hair, eyebrows practically non-existent, and teeth ending in shark-like points. Even she looked surprised. Wow, that is the most genuinely frightening face I've ever seen. And yet she was even more surprised that she didn't bristle up. Sure, it took a lot to frighten someone who could go hand to hand with an Ava, but that amount of shock should have produced an instinctive response. It was bad to judge people by appearances, but she was, after all, in the time-critical business of stabbing people in the face for world peace. Run, Seiichiro! Shouted the girls on the ground.
But, Ryoko-chan...
This is more important than either of us, Katano!
the smaller girl with the intense eyes commented. She'd leapt and managed to wrap herself crab-like around the target's back. Raka couldn't quite reach back far enough to pull her off, and other methods would damage her modesty.
It won't be cowardice. We can fight more easily if we don't have to worry about protecting you or the objective.
This one definitely reminds me too much of me.
All right, if you say so, Akuno-chan.
Very reluctantly, he turned away. Kosorioka! A large teen with a broad face and curly hair barreled in through the alley and bumped into the fierce-looking teen. Seiichiro Kitano spun around and landed on his back. Fear not! I, Seikichi Kuroda, have arrived! Who has dared to harm the lovely Koiso Ryoko? I will never forgive you! You wanna die, dumbass? Takahisa shouted from the ground. Don't make it Tano-san drop the goddamn nuke! Ha ha! You're such a joker, Takahisa-kun. No way us middle school students would have to deal with... You're serious? On the ground, Kitano waved, smiling. Ah! Raka was struck by a strong case of deja vu. Bickering in the middle of danger, and fools trying to outdo each other with heroic sacrifices. She looked at them more slowly. They were a motley group of individuals, and there was clear history between them. A complicated mesh of friendships, battles, love triangles, and assorted other interesting events that bound them tight. Another short-haired girl appeared, but her round, unguarded face and exhausted huffs clearly marked her with civilian, or normal, or what the hell am I doing here? She did wear a large pendant with the Saikana symbol though. Ikuko Hirayama was a marginally stronger psyker than her best friend, which came as a complete surprise, for she always has been in Ryoko's shadow. That can't be Ryoko's friend, eh? Surely such a lovely girl would not be working for the forces of darkness. Kuroda rubbed at his smooth chin. Although she is wearing all black, a sure sign of villainous intent. But she makes it look good. I don't feel comfortable with doing violence to that. I'm a gentleman after all. Ikuko looked long-suffering. He was just searching for any excuse not to fight, and therefore inevitably look bad. Anyone that could beat Ryoko, Takahisa and Ikuno, the three strongest fighters of their former school, wasn't someone he wanted to tangle with.
She is dangerous, Kuroda-san. Kitano-san, let's all back away slowly and run.
She touched the pendant, the crystal forming the eye glowing a purplish hue.
I can't sense all that well. It's like looking at a ghost, but there's power there.
It was like watching a volcanic eruption on TV. One didn't have to feel the heat to know it wasn't a good idea to stay too close to flowing molten rock. Kitano was getting up.
I need to help Ryoko-chan and Ikuno-chan. We'll be just fine, boss!
Takahisa shouted, not minding being ignored in the priority levels. He'd once more claimed the enemy's ankles. He tried not to look straight up.
Just go!
Kuroda didn't need much more prompting. Ikuko and Kitano looked regretful, but followed.
I'm still in the tanks, aren't I?
Raka said blandly.
I'm dreaming all this. This is insanity.
No way her plans were going to get foiled by a bunch of meddling kids. Admittedly, ones with the vine-like persistence. Somewhere, a dog began barking.
Enough.
Air exploded outwards, flinging the teenagers off her and smashing into walls or metal crates. She took one step forward, leaving a sunken boot print into the concrete. She leapt, blurring out of view. There was a girlish scream in front of her. Two, actually, and a pathetically weak psycho shield sprang into being. She punched through with ease, uncaring of another scream, this time in pain. Kuroda, though weak in personality, was actually large and intimidating. He was a loyal friend in his own way, and put himself as a physical barrier between her and Katana. She kicked him in the face and vaulted over his head. He fell over, bleeding from the nose.
Wait.
He had seen the gates of what lay beyond absolute territory. He was then unconscious, but with a silly grin on his face. Is that parkour? She was capable of running on high walls at a 90-degree angle to the ground. Katana was hard to pin down, far more agile than she'd anticipated. She could sense his fear, and yet also iron determination. He dodged and weaved through obstacles, climbing one-handed up link fences with instinctive surety. Raka began picking up random objects and throwing it at his head. He managed to dodge them all without looking. She picked up a rusted freezer and threw. He leaped aside just in time as a steel appliance crumpled a brick wall. Dust and fragments flew. He rolled to a stop against another wall, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. His head jerked around like that of a possessed puppet, but he was just looking for any escape. He had the face of a mass murderer, and it showed panic. Raka felt guilty. He wasn't a blank, but more than just his appearance, there was something about his presence that made others uncomfortable. Combined with his face, it would surely have led to many misunderstandings. Yet from his interactions with others, it also proved he could create an emotional equilibrium. It wasn't enough she had to take out civilians, but bullying an innocent? She had a task to complete.
Give it back and your girlfriends, your friends, will live.
She spoke with a voice echoing oddly. A weird wind spiraled around her, making her hair float in savage strands. Better that they get scared off by her than to meet up with some other force far less choosy about their methods. Kitano hugged the device.
No, I can't.
This is not a game. It is about time Ikari's allies realize that.
She held out her open right hand.
This is too important to be left to chance. I'd rather not have to take it from your corpse. Give it here, and I promise to you that you and your friends will not have any further trouble from me.
Even Kitano knew that statement could be taken many ways.
You can hurt a lot more people with this. This is a bad thing. I won't let you use it.
She sighed again.
I realize we as a nation and a people have a phobia about nuclear weapons, but you must understand that there are uses even for such devices, and that they come in different yields. That one there is only about 5 kilotons, not enough to— Leave Seichiro alone!
She felt arms choke off her neck and legs wrap around her thighs. Kelso Ryuko had dive-tackled another crab hold. There was another sudden thump, and Raka stumbled forward. Ikuno had decided to add her weight into the mix.
Ditto,
said the smaller girls, her hands holding onto the underside of Ryoko's breasts. The angel hybrid might have prodigious strength, but she still had to keep a centre of balance with 2 girls piled on her back. Raka hunched over and shook her fist in frustration. He was afraid. Ironic that he who boasted his followers would know no fear should have so much of it. Their fears in the future, their lack of knowledge, their failings of flesh, he would take it, eat of it, and keep it safe. Faith was trust in that somehow. It would all work out. Shinji Ikari didn't have faith in himself, for how could he trust that which he knew all too well? She could understand his fear, for courage was to act despite the presence of fear, not the absence of it. He was insane, but at least not psychotic. It was fun to cause Shinji Ikari discomfort. That face, often so calm in the middle of stress to break mountains, would light up with panic in the emotional shoals he was unable to maneuver through. One could almost see behind those eyes contingency plans going click, click, click as he tried to deal with it. Then if you poke him in the right place, he would squeak and have to start all over again. Ayanami was wary. Ibuki was confused but trusting. Ikari's face was placid, and just by the minute widening of his eyes she knew he had settled on a plan. As long as it was centred upon him, he'd always been willing to let others hang by their own ropes. The moment any of it threatened his loved ones, though, her life was worth dirt. She smirked. She flicked at her hair and let it darken, lengthening to her waist. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and fingers laced together, though not in the manner of his father. The palms were together as if praying, with the thumbs resting on his bottom lip. Silence stretched on the apartment, as everyone waited for someone else to make the first move. She sighed. She knelt in front of him in the formal pose of supplication. She looked up and opened her mouth. She leaned forward and sought the zipper of his pants with her teeth. He fell backwards, the chair clattering on the floor. Whoa, wait, what do you think you're doing?
I have no patience for any more semantic games.
Raka sighed again.
I remain true to our purpose, and my plans are complementary to yours. If this is what it will take to show that I have no aims of usurping your place or denying your dominion.
You don't have to do that!
No, and that's why it is proof. No, you will not,
said Ray, her tone flat and hostile. Raka smiled slightly. Ayanami was cute when she was all grumpy and possessive like that. She didn't think the girl had it in her. And it was evening, and it was morning, and she was done. Castle Sternbrand was a full 2 days gone. World communications were still fuzzy. The conditions were perfect. She took another nibble out of her chocolate ice cream cone and watched the clear blue sky. The moon was a distant white disk in the sky. There were 4 tones. It was just coincidence that 4 was an unlucky number in Japan. The AT field detector screamed. With his finger, Kil Lorenz marked out the firmament. Light came down from the sky and etched the words into the earth. He picked out 3 consonants from the field. He turned towards the above and sealed the height with YHV. A green beam carved these symbols into steel and rock. AT field sensors screamed like crazy and died. People were already in the deep shelters at the city edges, as the Tokyo Free Council thought it very likely there would be an attack. The citizens had been stuck in their shelters, bored for over 8 hours, that the event was both surprise and a relief. Kil turned towards the below and sealed the depths with HYV. Rei Ayanami waited on a hilltop, in a special platform dedicated to the Gargant Zero. She noticed that the power flow from the geofront had stopped. Her internal power meter reported 2 hours of combat potential, figuring in maximum drain using AT fields. Arguably, her weapons demanded even more than that. It was why she was provided with 6 separate capacitor banks on the surface. Her Ava was clad in heavy Titanicus gear, its shape completely hidden under large, bulky yellow modules. Kensuke called it Full Armor Evangelion the O. Oh, what? Just O. Kensuke was being Kensuke and was thereafter ignored. It was total darkness inside. Mayabuki calmly turned on a nearby emergency lamp, illuminating Ritsuko Akagi's sleeping visage. She'd begged away from active duty for a while. It was her place to remain by her senpai's side. With a loaded bolter, Misato couldn't exactly refuse her, for Maya could just pull her vacation days for that moment. As for visiting hours, she could just bribe or threaten the hospital staff to let her stay. It wasn't a good idea to annoy the one with administrative access to all employee records and the payroll. She grit her teeth and forced herself through the pain. Something was attacking the Magi. Though all was silent and bleak, she could tell it was starting to fight back. Satsuki Wii, the flighty blonde from second shift, sat in Mayabuki's usual spot. She was grateful the dark hid her panic attack. She scrambled in the dark for the flashlights. Why has the Magi stopped? What happened to Akagi's security layers?
We don't know, sir,
she replied up to Gendo.
This is a total shutdown. Everything including the reactors and the backup generators. Even the emergency lights aren't working.
This is impossible, Makoto added, having found the pen light. It was the single bright spot in the gloom. The grids are physically separated. There should be no way to force a shutdown. Maya's console suddenly blinked back to life, though the monitors flickered weakly.
The Evangelions are still active,
Satsuki shouted triumphantly. She then chided herself. Of course they'd be active. They had internal batteries. Wait, why was Lieutenant Ibuki's console the first to turn on? Extending AT field, Shinji mumbled with his eyes closed. Unit 1 waited on the geofront surface, clad in the original purple Titanicus modules. It was on one knee as if waiting to be knighted. One by one, geofront systems went back online. The Magi was the last, though there were plenty of other systems that required its processing power which were still offline. Lights came back, the air pumps whirred back to life, much to everyone's relief. Sensors returned and then everything went red. Incoming hostiles, Shigeru shouted, already working to get additional data. 12 angels. No. Evangelions. Inbound. AT fields active.
Where'd they come from? Is the Cradle counter-attacking?
Misato sat back down and belted herself in.
Open the channels to Cyberspace. Engage all active defences. Ashino Lance Cannon on standby.
Defences online, Makoto reported. Targets being acquired. Oh no. Units 0 and 1 are also being flagged as hostile targets.
Override! No good, senpai.
Satsuki resisted the urge to scream and clutch at regal tresses. She got up and moved to Ritsuko's seat. Even her senpai's authorization code didn't work.
The Magi's starting to expand threat recognition protocols. Oh my! We just got flagged as hostile.
Tokyo 3's defences were nothing short of legendary. It was now turned against itself. Fortunately, most of the automated defences were up on the surface. 8 bright yellow lances stabbed at the glowing red sphere that was Unit 0's AT field. Then in rapid succession, 8 shots snapped out to destroy the cannon routes that should have provided covering fire for Ayanami's firing station. She placed the positron rifle back on the charging rack. Ray was certain the shots disabled the positron cannons without harming the crew inside. The others in the other roosts would surely be trying to recover manual control. A pity, but she had to act quickly. She looked up at the figures descending in a spiral. The green laser from the move pulsed in a constant stream, carving something to the east. With VIH, it was sealed. A pane of flickering pale green energy flashed into existence.
Ray! The lad's cannon's turning towards you! Move!
I must not, Major Katsuragi. I am the only practical air defense that remains.
You can't block the lance cannon with your AT field. Even if you succeed, you'll be too drained to engage in combat against 12 Avers.
That is true. It is why I must destroy the enemy before they land.
A note of pleading entered her voice.
I can do this, Major Katsuragi.
You have a plan?
Yes. Please recover control over the defences. We will need them.
Misato nodded. There was a time to improvise and just trust that the pilots knew what they were doing. She turned to Shigeru.
Give me Cerberus base. What do they have?
Then to Makoto.
Try to stop the Bakelite from flooding the corridors first. We can try manually forcing open the bulkheads later.
To Satsuki.
Make sure the capacitors are charged and keep me informed about the pilots.
They went to work. Gendo watched the fluid ease with which they adapted. The out-of-control measures were intended against assault by conventional forces.
What does Seal intend, trying to keep us trapped in here? Futsuki muttered. Are they trying to destroy our defences for later?
That didn't sound reasonable. Anything was better than letting infantry run into grid-fired lasers. Sensei, Kyo has broken the seals. The cradle of the moon, the black seed, it is active. Gendo closed his eyes and ruminated. Seal only needs the lance and the body of Lilith. Everything else is disposable.
Do you know what they're planning?
Gendo opened his eyes and told him what Seal intended to do, to break their prodigious defences. Futsuki looked ashen.
That's beyond insane. It's cheesy.
And at the same time impossible to counter. Futsuki groaned.
I need a vacation.
Sensei, do you remember that it was you that got us banned from Hawaii? That you had found it all so thoroughly hilarious didn't mean Gendo would ever stop holding that against the older man. Raka finished off her ice cream and wiped at her lips. Ayanami and the others likely thought plans had to be perfect, like diamonds, brittle if hit with enough force, but strong enough to grind away all opposition. Like Ikari, both of them, she now knew good plans were like sculpting with clay. Work too quickly or on too soft material and the form wouldn't hold. Likewise, letting things go for too long would harden the situation, forcing greater and greater measures just to change one little flaw. There was always the risk something would break. She looked to the lance cannon at the lake and saw that its movement had somehow jammed. Not good. The enemy was brute-forcing probability to control the Magi systems, but the cannon crew shouldn't regain control too soon. It was the easiest phase of what may happen, and the one they could actually hijack to their own benefit. She stood up, clicked her heels twice, and disappeared.